OMG. A coworker tried to frame me for unauthorized purchases, but I uncovered her scheme and she got fired. Sweet justice. This situation escalated in March 2021, during the height of lockdowns and various challenges. Individuals I collaborate with would likely recognize it, hopefully. They do not come across this discussion. It revolves around an individual whose aspirations exceeded their ethics and the law, ultimately leading to their downfall. Apologies for the length. There is a summary at the end. At that time, I held the position of manager at a medium-sized company. During my tenure, a new employee joined my team, whom I will refer to as Evil. She was in her mid-20s and had just graduated from college. She tended to talk incessantly about her ideas, plans, and projects, yet rarely produced any tangible results. When I approached her regarding clients who were dissatisfied due to her lack of communication, she always had a justification, claiming the clients were difficult, she was overwhelmed, or that she had sent an email that must have ended up in the spam folder. Essentially, it was never her responsibility. The situation reached a point where, following one of our monthly meetings, I called her in to clarify that if she was unable to complete her tasks, she needed to inform us so that we could allocate resources effectively and ensure nothing fell through the cracks. To be honest, I adopted a rather forthright approach. Her inadequate performance was affecting the entire team, and my primary duty was to ensure that the team remained on schedule. While I understand that individuals may face pressure and personal issues that impact their work, if every time I inquire about a project, you respond, "Everything is fine. I have it all in control," only for everything to unravel, and your only reaction is to blame the client, we have an issue. I conveyed that I had no intention of initiating formal performance reviews, but going forward, I would like her to meet with me on Monday mornings for 10 minutes to discuss weekly objectives and determine whether she required assistance with any of her clients. I understand that micromanagement is unpleasant, so I aimed to keep these meetings brief and primarily to offer support. However, it was evident that she harbored resentment towards me and was, by all appearances, plotting her own form of revenge. Part of my responsibilities included the use of a purchasing card, which was not officially in my name, but to which I had access. The card was provided to me to make minor office purchases or spend up to $500.00 for clients. It was kept in an office I shared with another team manager, where both of us could access it as needed. One day, I received a call from the accounting department inquiring about some unusual transactions on the card. They mentioned a Photoshop subscription, a few Uber Eats orders, an HBO subscription, and more. I informed them that I was unaware of these charges and suggested they consult the other team manager. Apparently, that manager was also oblivious because by the following week, I found myself summoned to the big boss's office. After both my colleague and I denied any involvement, the accounting team had initiated inquiries with Adobe, Uber, and other service providers to trace the transactions. They indicated that not only were the accounts registered in my name, but they were also linked to an email that included my name as well, e.g., wordroll3@domaincom or something similar. I cannot adequately express the sensation of being in that meeting. I felt physically ill and utterly bewildered. I was so stunned that I struggled to articulate a response. It felt as though I was on the verge of being terminated, and I couldn't fathom how that was possible. The director emphasized that access to the card was a privilege and that I had signed an agreement regarding its proper use. I insisted that I had not misused the card, and while my boss listened, it was evident he was unconvinced. Internally, I was questioning my own memory, worrying that perhaps I had inadvertently saved the card's details in Google and that maybe my wife had accidentally used it. The entire experience was dreadful, and I found myself apologizing repeatedly, stating, "I am unsure how this occurred. I assure you that I recognize none of these expenses were appropriate charges to company funds. There must have been a mistake. Could I please obtain the details to investigate?" And so forth. When I finally exited that office, my job still tenuously intact, Evil was waiting for me at the door of my office. She was grinning broadly and sweetly informed me that she had been anticipating our morning meeting. I explained that something had arisen and we would have the meeting the following day. She responded, "Oh, will you be in tomorrow? Confused because at that moment I was unaware I was involved in a revenge storyline, I simply replied, "Yes, why would I not be in tomorrow?" She took a sip of her tea and responded, "Oh, no reason," turned, and sauntered back to her desk. Even though something felt off, I was still preoccupied with the earlier meeting with my boss. Therefore, I spent the next few hours on the phone with my wife and contacting Adobe, conducting the same inquiries the accounting team had made. It quickly became clear that someone had been utilizing my name and the company card to make various online purchases. Had I been hacked? Was my personal information circulating on the dark web, with cybercriminals yearning for Photoshop and Wendy's delivery? The Uber Eats orders would be her unraveling. After discussing the situation over the phone, and obviously providing my name linked to the account, the representative informed me where the food had been delivered. It was within our city, immediately ruling out any idea of my information being sold online. Now, I was both suspicious and furious. I typically do not like to assume the worst in people, but that had changed. Trusting my instincts, I retrieved Evil's employee information and checked her address. I accessed Google Maps, dropped a pin on her residence, and compared it to the address Uber Eats provided. It was right on the corner of her block. Enraged, I waited until she left for the day and requested IT to grant me access to her laptop. Sure enough, when I logged into her company account, I discovered the email address linked to her transactions wordroll3 at domain.com. She had been clever in certain aspects. The IP address she used was the office's, which would have linked back to me. She even had meals delivered to a different address and created a fictitious email address. However, saving her passwords on a work computer proved to be her oversight. That night, I contacted my boss and detailed my findings, ensuring the IT representative was present to substantiate that I had not merely accessed her computer to fabricate evidence. The following day, my boss summoned her to the office and terminated her employment so decisively that it seemed as if red trucks were queuing up outside the building. When she exited his office in tears, I made a point to be in the hallway, casually sipping a cup of tea. It had grown cold while I waited, yet still tasted sweet. I hope she returned home that evening. If so, she would have likely received a nice farewell, a Wendy's meal delivered by Uber Eats. Naturally, it was charged to my personal card. Revenge and justice can indeed be interchangeable, correct? Ultimately, she was dismissed from her position. My boss expressed regret concerning the situation, and we parted amicably when I left for a new opportunity in October. She never offered an apology, and I have not encountered her since. My boss chose not to involve the police, nor did I. I simply wished to avoid the complications. Summary: one of my colleagues misappropriated a company card and began making Uber Eats and other unauthorized purchases in my name in an attempt to have me dismissed. I discovered her actions, leading to her termination, and arranged for some farewell Wendy's to be delivered to her on her way out. Story 2. I sued without instructions. The client lost millions because Frank ignored my warnings and he got fired. OMG, what a turn of events. As I approached my 40th birthday, I had accumulated significant knowledge from more than a decade of practicing law. One of the most crucial insights I received came from an experienced attorney under whom I worked as a summer intern after my second year of law school. A lawyer has 3 responsibilities, he informed me. First, to himself, second, to the court, and finally, to the client. Always prioritize yourself and place the client last. The reasoning? Clients will betray you, he remarked. They will abandon you without a moment's hesitation. In retrospect, I should have continued my association with this lawyer. However, being youthful and somewhat foolish, I chose to work in the city, where I still find myself today. Luckily, I retained this lesson, which proved invaluable many years later when a client indeed attempted to jeopardize my career. The client was a mid-sized company with varied holdings, substantial enough to possess a significant real estate portfolio, yet not quite large enough to go public. One day, one of their buildings was destroyed by fire. The company sought to file an insurance claim, instructing Frank, a seasoned employee, to handle the matter. Frank, nearing 60, believed he had the situation under control and felt he did not require my assistance with the insurance claim. He insisted he managed everything well. Besides, hiring lawyers was costly. Some individuals derive satisfaction from avoiding legal fees, and Frank was certainly one of them, relishing every dollar he saved from legal expenditures. I interacted frequently with Frank, and he habitually tried to minimize my fees. "The insurance company will betray you," I cautioned Frank. Fortunately, I had learned about the fire and subsequent loss purely by chance, as Frank had not sought my help. He merely mentioned it in passing. Since then, I had worked diligently to ensure he understood the gravity of the situation. I had to persistently urge him to provide the proof of loss form, verifying he hadn't made any mistakes. Frank frequently made errors, leading me to question how he retained his employment. At least the proof of loss was satisfactory, relieving me of one source of concern. "You can't be sure of that," he countered. It was evident he wanted to dismiss me from the call. "I am tasked with knowing when insurers are attempting to deceive my clients," I responded, "and the insurance company is going to deceive you. They have been dragging their feet for some time with endless requests for information and paperwork, but they have no intention of compensating you, not unless you take legal action." But Frank remained insistent, claiming he was managing things and stating he had an excellent relationship with the adjuster. "The deadline for filing a lawsuit is in 2 weeks," I reminded him, "and once that period has expired, it will be too late to take legal action. Once the deadline passes, they will stop answering your calls, and you will receive a final message indicating that you have missed your chance. Do not delay this any further. Allow me to sue now, and you'll have the funds quickly." Frank casually replied, "Sure, fine, whatever, don't bother me. I got this," before ending the call as swiftly as possible. I followed up with my standard email, outlining clear warnings and recommendations, which he disregarded. I sent the email again and again as the deadline loomed, and once more a couple of days before the cutoff. "I will be in trial and unavailable," my final email stated. "However, you must initiate a lawsuit. You have other firms on your list. Choose one and proceed." He did not respond, and I went off to attend my trial. The trial spanned a couple of weeks without any word from Frank. Then a month passed, followed by another month, still no contact. I assumed he had resolved the issue. Perhaps Frank was right after all, I thought to myself, and then my phone rang. It was Frank. "Do you recall that insurance claim we discussed regarding the fire?" He acted as if we hadn't talked about it well over a dozen times previously. I assumed he was calling to boast, so I got straight to the point. "So they paid out. That's wonderful news, Frank. You were correct." He inquired what I was referring to and asked to see a copy of the claim. "What claim?" I replied. "The claim against the insurance company. You know that claim." "Does that imply the insurance provider did not compensate you?" I asked. He hung up, and moments later, my computer notified me of an email from Frank. He recounted our discussion, mentioned he instructed me to sue, and expressed concern about not receiving a copy of the claim, so he was following up for it. I replied to him, "I assume the insurer didn't pay you, just as I predicted, and now that the deadline has lapsed, they have told you to go elsewhere, leaving you with millions in losses. Is that correct?" I regretted not addressing the issue directly with Frank's supervisor when he refused to heed my advice. However, if I had gone above his head, I would likely never have received another case from him again. But that was a past concern. This was the current scenario. Therefore, I included Frank's boss and his superior in the email, along with Bill, the client's in-house counsel. Bill promptly acknowledged my email and called me later that day. "Frank made a mistake," he stated. "We are aware of that. He is not competent. So what should we do?" "So his justifications failed." "Correct." Bill explained that they had called Frank into a conference room, but his account did not hold up, considering all the warnings I had sent him. Moreover, he should not have been engaging with the insurer if he had directed me to initiate legal proceedings. Once the matter was handed over to legal counsel, Frank's involvement should have concluded. The company recognized that Frank was deceiving them. "Is that it then?" Bill asked. "We simply lost a couple of $1 million. "It's manageable," I reassured him, explaining that upon realizing Frank's impending error, I had filed a claim against the insurer. Since I had previously obtained the proof of loss from Frank, I had sufficient information to file action to preserve the right to pursue the case. The claim was not particularly strong or detailed, but it was adequate. "You filed a lawsuit without any direction." Bill expressed disbelief. Attorneys are not supposed to initiate lawsuits without proper instructions. Doing so can make them personally liable for any costs incurred by the opposing side. It's a serious breach to sue without authorization. Indeed, I confirmed. I did file a lawsuit without instructions. I accessed a copy of the claim and emailed it to him while we spoke. It's a bit rough around the edges, I noted, but we can always make revisions. Thank goodness, Bill exclaimed. May I assign it to you? Naturally. The insurer was vulnerable, and I was confident I would secure compensation from them without any issues. A few days later, I received a call from another colleague at the client's organization, someone I typically didn't interact with. They had a situation and required my assistance. I usually work with Frank, I mentioned. What's going on? The situation was that Frank had been summoned to another meeting where they presented him with a one-page letter. He subsequently packed his belongings into a box, and security escorted him by his coworkers to the elevator and down to the parking area. Goodbye, Frank. He was too advanced in age to secure another position, at least one of decent quality. It marked a significant turning point in Frank's life, but for me, he was merely a cautionary tale I sometimes share with younger lawyers over drinks, perhaps too frequently, as I grow older and reminisce about my preferred anecdotes. I bore no ill will toward Frank. On the contrary, I would have felt some sympathy for him had he not attempted to undermine me. The individual who took his place was excellent and never tried to shortchange me, so everything turned out well. Story 3. OMG, I discovered my sister was a live-in unpaid maid. I helped her go to college and got our manipulative sister fired. Mandatory background information: many of you have likely come across families with a rigid hierarchy, where typically the oldest member wields the most power. My family fits this description, except my parents are drug-addicted layabouts, leading my eldest sister, 31 years old, whom I will refer to as entitled mother, to raise all 5 of us. She is the matriarch of our family. When she says, "Jump," everyone responds, "How high?" This narrative centers on my youngest sister, 20 years old, whom I will call little sister. Most of us possess a few memories of our mother before she lost her composure, except for little sister. To her, entitled mother has been the only mother she has ever known, and entitled mother is well aware of how to exploit that. Once we each turned 18, we all fled our parents' home, except for entitled mother. She chose to relocate across the country only after little sister and our brother were raised and in their mid-teens, and promptly found jobs and residences for all of us to move to the same state as her. Little sister spent years pleading to live with her, but entitled mother consistently turned her down, claiming someone needed to look after our father and that she and her new husband required privacy. This changed when entitled mother became pregnant. She convinced little sister to move in with her, where she has been living for the past 2.5 years, helping out. Now, to the story entitled Father's Relatives Planned a Visit for a couple of weeks, so little sister needed to stay with me during that time to accommodate them in her room. It's essential to mention that entitled mother did not ask me or inform me about this. She simply dropped off little sister. One day, while I was studying for my master's degree, she mentioned her long-standing desire to attend college, which initiated the following conversation: me. "So why don't you pursue it?" Little sister: "Oh, I spoke with entitled mother about it, but she insisted that not everyone is suited for college and that I wouldn't manage to work, study, and care for niece simultaneously. Plus, it's costly." Me: "Most people juggle work and study at the same time, and she could enroll niece in daycare. I doubt it would be significantly pricier than what she's currently providing you." Little sister: "She doesn't pay me. She already provides meals and housing, and if I need money, I just pick up extra shifts at work." That's how I learned my sister was not only babysitting, but also cleaning the entire house every day without compensation. She had even reduced her work hours to just 8 hours a week because she was too busy caring for our niece. To summarize, it took me several weeks to persuade her to apply to community college, and more weeks for her to navigate the application process, but she finally received confirmation that she would start in September, all without entitled mother's knowledge. She intended to announce it during our next family gathering for Independence Day. However, before that could occur, entitled mother gathered everyone at her home to reveal her pregnancy. Little sister burst into tears, fearing she would no longer be permitted to attend college. Entitled mother reacted with deep hurt and offense at the fact that little sister had made plans behind her back. I interjected. Our other siblings joined in. It quickly turned into chaos. How could you do this to me? Who will care for the babies? I cannot believe how selfish you are. If you prefer OP so much, why not just stay with her? These were among the many statements she made. She expelled me and little sister, who remained with me until they reconciled. Both of our siblings reached out to me. One admonished me to mind my own business, while the other expressed support but remained silent. Following this, little sister returned to living with entitled mother and abandoned her college aspirations. Nevertheless, they reached an agreement where she would receive $6 per hour and could take on additional shifts at her job until the baby is born, with plans to pursue a proper college education once the child turns 1. I understand it's a troubling situation, but all of them, especially little sister, adore entitled mother as though she were a deity. I waited a year to implement my revenge, ensuring my sister had saved enough funds to be independent. The revenge first, I researched the legality of compensating a homeless individual with food and shelter. In the United States, this is permissible in certain states as long as specific boundaries are respected to avoid the person becoming classified as an employee. For instance, I could provide a list of tasks, but couldn't mandate that they be completed within a particular time frame. I also could not insist someone be present at a scheduled time. It's all about how the requests are phrased. Additionally, I had to adhere to housing regulations. If local laws required 30 days' notice for tenants, I had to give the same notice to this individual. I documented everything, gathering numerous screenshots of entitled mother's admissions of not compensating little sister or permitting her to move out or secure a job, and acknowledging her tendency to eject her from home at will. Despite the technicalities seeming futile since no one would likely sue her, my intent was to ensure her employer understood that, should an action be taken against her, it would be a straightforward case. Entitled mother worked at a civil rights attorney's office, so revealing that she had a genuine modern-day slave would undoubtedly lead to her termination. I could have simply created a temporary email to inform her boss, but that would provide her insight into why she was being dismissed, which could create complications for both little sister and me. So, what did I do? Entitled mother frequently complained about a manager at her office who disliked her and had been trying to have her fired for ages. I visited the company website, located the individual. Fortunately, she was the sole, Ashley, employed there, and traced her on social media. I discovered a post wherein she tagged her yoga studio. I then enrolled at that studio. It took several weeks of trial and error to identify the specific class Ashley attended, but after persistent effort, I found her. For months, I attended yoga sessions every Tuesday and Friday at 8 a.m., gradually forging a friendship with her. About 3 months in, she asked to follow me on Instagram, and I had already prepared by deleting the few images I had with entitled mother. After 9 months, when our friendship had solidified, I happened to mention the amusing coincidence that I discovered she worked alongside entitled mother. Before things could become awkward, I remarked, "It's ironic she works in civil rights considering everything." This piqued Ashley's interest. I shared the entire story with her, providing every screenshot. I could almost see her eyes gleaming. They had their own history, but all you need to understand is that entitled mother is a problematic individual. Ashley was eager for payback as much as I was. I explained the situation concerning little sister and why entitled mother must never discover what I was doing. This was why my friendship with Ashley was crucial. Had I merely sent the evidence with an explanation, they would likely have disregarded it since it presented a valid reason to fire her. I forwarded the files under the condition that entitled mother would remain oblivious, but Ashley needed them to convince the other owner, who was the reason for entitled mother's continued employment. 2 months later, entitled mother was terminated due to minor infractions, tardiness, and overall poor performance. It was a small victory, certainly, but I relished visiting her during the 4 months she was unemployed. She seemed exhausted and miserable all the time since she could not afford childcare, and with little sister away at college, she genuinely had to look after her children. The lesson to be learned from this experience is to check on your siblings. They may find themselves in a situation akin to modern slavery. Story 4. I reported a customer's harassment, but management dismissed my concerns, leading to my firing after I quit for safety. What a mess. Hello, everyone. This will be my very first post, and I am somewhat uncertain about how to begin, so I appreciate your patience. To start, I prefer not to disclose too much information regarding my place of employment as this is quite recent, and I am seeking advice on the matter. Here are the individuals involved in the story I will share. I am a 21-year-old female. I will narrate this from a first-person perspective. Customer A, male. Supervisor B, male. Supervisor C, female. Coworker D, female. Manager E, female. Here we go. I was employed by a company as a cashier for nearly 3 months. Most of my coworkers were wonderful, and I had no personal issues with them. However, some were not the most effective in their roles. I recognize that many jobs can be challenging and that various situations can be tough to navigate. At this job, we had numerous customers coming and going, and I primarily worked evening shifts. A few weeks back, a customer A, asked me to befriend them. Since I don't have many friends, I thought it would be fine. A side note, customer A was a regular at our store, so I had seen him frequently and had started to know him better. A few shifts later, customer A returned, appearing somewhat upset that I had not yet added him. I found it strange because I had never experienced someone nearly yelling at me to be added on social media. Still, I chose to dismiss it, thinking perhaps he was having a rough evening, and added him later that night after my shift. Fast forward a few days, and I was working again when customer A came in expressing that he wanted to see me. He inquired again if I had added him, and I replied that I had found some time to do it. Then, as he was leaving with his items, he made eye contact with me, stuck his tongue out, and raised his eyebrows in a way that I interpreted as suggestive, or at least I believe that's the correct term. It seemed like he was expecting me to find it appealing in some way. After customer A exited, I approached Supervisor B to discuss the encounter. He looked straight at me and laughed, stating, "That's just how customer A is. He's new here and doesn't understand." I nodded and decided that if it happened again, I would report it to someone else. Unfortunately, Supervisor B was present for most of my shifts, leaving me with limited options. A few days passed, and naturally, customer A returned yet again, searching the store for me. Upon finding me, he commented, "You look so tired," and made another suggestive gesture. I attempted to have someone else check him out, but I was the only one available. Minutes later, he came to the register, paid for his items, and before leaving, made another flirtatious gesture towards me. I tried to reach Supervisor B to explain the situation, but he was busy. Nonetheless, I managed to tell him about what had happened. He remarked, "Customer A doesn't understand. If it bothers you that much, I'll speak to him the next time I see him." After that, he returned to work. That evening, I reached out to another supervisor, Supervisor C, seeking advice. She indicated that the matter hadn't been appropriately managed and assured me she would discuss it with Manager E the next day. I took a few deep breaths and waited for guidance. The following morning, Supervisor C called me, stating I could file a human resources report about the situation when I came in that night. After submitting the HR report, I returned to my usual duties. A couple of nights later, customer A came back, but this time I had a coworker D, assisting me at the register, which made me feel less isolated. Coworker D was stocking shelves when customer A entered and immediately approached her to chat. As a side note, coworker D is female, which I feel is significant. I noticed that coworker D appeared quite uncomfortable during their interaction, so I decided to check on her. Customer A noticed me approaching and asked if I thought coworker D looked like a celebrity. I replied, "I don't really see it." Customer A then grabbed my shoulder, digging his nails into my back, insisting, "No, look at coworker D's face." As I tried to step away, he pulled me back roughly, repeating, "Look at her face." I forced a laugh, backing away again, while glancing at coworker D, who looked terrified and seemed to need assistance. I decided to find a supervisor on duty. Fortunately, it was Supervisor B again. I informed him that customer had just grabbed me, and he responded, "I'll handle it," before going to speak with customer A. Later that night, I checked on coworker D to see if she was all right, and she expressed her gratitude for my intervention. I asked her what had transpired after I sent Supervisor B to address the situation. Coworker D explained. He simply asked customer A to leave, but he was really polite about it. He said, "You can't treat people who work here like that, and that behavior is unacceptable, so please leave." I asked if that was all he did, to which she replied, "Yes, basically." Since Manager E was off the following day, I had to wait to discuss the incident with her. I drafted another HR report expressing that I no longer felt safe going to work or returning home, as I live relatively close, and it wouldn't be difficult for someone to follow me to my car or residence. The day after submitting the report, Manager E was initially unaware of the situation due to her absence. As I noticed her coming in, I requested a conversation, but she did not respond. Eventually, she reviewed the report on her desk and opted to speak with me. After about 10 minutes before my shift concluded, I was called into her office for a discussion. I was informed. The only camera that captures audio is by the cashier station, so if customer A wasn't up front doing anything, I wouldn't have grounds for action unless you could provide the time, date, location, and hour it occurred. I replied, "If you actually read my report, all that information is included: the times, dates, locations, and everyone present. Everything you need to ban this customer is in there." She simply said, "Okay, I will try to look into it, but I don't have any guarantees." A few more days passed, and I received a text from Manager E stating she could not locate the footage. It turned out the timing was off by about an hour. I was told, "Customer A appeared to be cheerful on camera, and you're going from the cashier station to check on Coworker D would reflect poorly on you. Why would you approach a customer you were worried or scared of? Since he looked happy, it's unlikely HR will ban him or take any action. If you feel scared, you should use the panic button behind the counter. Anything that happens outside of work, even if it's on the property, is not our issue. He is allowed back in, and if he touches you again or yells at you again, we might consider banning him." I inquired about my work schedule, which had been altered from 40 to 45 hours weekly when I was part-time. I had requested to transition to full-time work, but I was sick for 2 days and accumulated too many points, making it difficult to regain my standing. As a result, I never had the opportunity to reduce my points to categorize myself as reliable. In the end, my hours dwindled from 40 to 45, all the way down to barely 15. When I confronted her about this, she informed me, "The higher-ups reduced our hours by 50% due to the season, and a few full-time employees are shifting to your schedule, so they require the hours as well." When I asked, "Who is joining my shift who is full-time?" I received no response. Feeling unsafe, I chose not to come into work, which resulted in my dismissal and removal from the schedule. Additionally, customer A has not reached out to me, and I blocked him following the incident with his tongue, so we had no contact outside of his visits. So, am I in the wrong for leaving my job to ensure my safety? Please share your thoughts or any advice you have regarding my situation, as it has left me feeling rattled. Story 5. Aita for being upset at my friend for not hanging out with me, but hanging out with her other friend. I, 24, female, have been friends with Emily, 21, female, for over a year now. We connected on social media, initially due to being mutual acquaintances with her mother from work and having experienced some shared drama concerning another girl who Emily stopped being friends with months prior to our conversation. We related to each other over this and also found that our personalities harmonized well. After our first in-person meeting, we quickly became inseparable for several months. For context, I have borderline personality disorder, and I recognize that my emotional reactions can sometimes be exaggerated or misinterpreted in certain situations. When I truly connect with someone, the connection is intense. I often idealize them, but I can switch to feeling opposite emotions almost immediately. Typically, I manage these feelings well and am emotionally mature enough to understand my boundaries, avoiding saying hurtful comments or acting impulsively usually. I do have occasional slip-ups, but those are rare. I have undergone considerable therapy, and despite my diagnosis, I believe I am generally well adjusted on most days, with the necessary effort to maintain that state. Initially, our hangouts were mostly just us, with her now ex-boyfriend rarely joining us. I didn't approve of him because he was abusive, but I was hesitant to express too much control over her decisions or risk driving her away, especially since she was heavily involved with him. On multiple occasions, when I expressed my discomfort in hanging out with him given that he had been hostile during previous outings, she would choose to distance herself from me, even locking herself in the bathroom or crying on the way home after fights. His treatment of her deeply bothered me, and it impacted our friendship for a while since I felt it was unjust that I had to tolerate her boyfriend while I couldn't invite mine, who happened to be the ex of the girl we both had issues with. At that time, I found it unfair that I had to bear with a guy I disliked, while she never had to return the favor. After their breakup, we went several weeks without speaking, as I had also just gone through a breakup, and we both needed space and healing, something that is completely normal and healthy, and I had no issues with it. Eventually, we began including other girls in our hangouts, typically forming a group of 3 to 4. This was where my issues began. Emily is the one with a car, so she usually drives us to far-off places. Currently, I do not have my own car for personal reasons, while the other girls do, but we always opted to ride with Emily. Since she doesn't drink, she often serves as our designated driver. She has even taken me to medical appointments as a favor, which I compensated by treating her to dinner or filling her gas tank. I avoid asking for favors I can't repay, as I fear being labeled as someone who uses others. This is a significant insecurity of mine. When we would go out looking for more girls to join us at bars or concerts, Emily would invite others whom I hadn't met without giving me any heads up beforehand, usually after I had already started drinking. When I suggested friends I was more familiar with, she would dismiss those suggestions on the basis that she was driving and it was her car. That was acceptable, but I wished she would at least check with me first about whether I was comfortable being around strangers, especially since I struggle with anxiety in new social situations. I raised this concern with her, especially about one particular friend I'll refer to as Sarah. Initially, Sarah appeared to be pleasant, but she quickly began critiquing everything we did. If we played card games, she would call them boring and childish, insisting on going for a walk instead. If we were out in the city, she would complain about how cold it was and express a desire to leave early, despite being aware of the weather and having failed to dress appropriately for it. When I spent one-on-one time with her, she was enjoyable to talk to and we connected on deeper topics, but in group settings, it seemed like all she could do was bring down the mood. Recently, I became pregnant with my fiancé of several months. She assisted in planning the proposal with him, which was beautiful and entirely perfect. I consider her the sole friend in my life that I view as a true friend instead of someone linked to her social circle. That is why she helped with the engagement. I don't interact with anyone else unless she invites them, as most of my friends have moved away to forge their own lives and pursue their education elsewhere. Then, about 6 months later, I learned I was pregnant. I haven't seen her since I visited her home to inform her of my pregnancy. At this moment, every time I reach out to her via direct message, Snapchat, or text, my messages remain unread for hours. We used to communicate better than this. I can engage in conversation until I propose that we meet up, at which point I am left without any reply. This has become a growing source of frustration. Yesterday, while at work and feeling bored, I sent her a message to chat. Toward the end of our conversation, I mentioned that it had been months since our last meeting and I missed her. She responded that she missed me a lot as well, and when I asked if we could meet up soon, she left my message unopened. To make matters worse, she later showed up at my workplace with Sarah. This felt like a betrayal because she couldn't even offer a simple response to acknowledge my message, such as, "I'm busy," or, "I'll be with Sarah today." Instead, I was left wondering. So, regarding where I may be in the wrong, I unsent my initial message. I haven't opened any of her messages since yesterday, mainly to avoid bringing up the topic and potentially escalating my emotions and jeopardizing our friendship. Additionally, why would I open the videos she sends me when she can't take a moment to respond to my messages? I realize this may come across as petty and immature. I understand that at 24, these issues may seem juvenile and inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. However, she is genuinely the only female friend I've had with whom I don't experience any sort of competitive tension. She typically isn't petty or sarcastic in any way. I'm starting to suspect that the shift in our dynamic may relate to my pregnancy, as that's when I first noticed the change. Since the news broke, I haven't seen her. When I inquired whether anything was wrong, she assured me that there was not and that she has simply been reclusive. Yet, her choice to hang out with Sarah while ignoring my messages feels more like passive aggression to me. Am I the one at fault for deleting the message and leaving her undelivered?